And it's just a recurring thing is everybody just says, I want more intimacy. We would go back and go, what does that mean to you? It's a question that we use often with our couples. And what we share is when there's a word or there's a phrase and you're not sure about it, well, what does that mean to you? Because my expectation may be, well, this is what it means. But your spouse, on the other hand, it has a whole nother meaning to it. And so intimacy in our society now has basically become sex. I looked it up and Elisa looked it up, the definition, and intimacy is closeness and connection. And so we begin to go, wait a minute, if intimacy is closeness and connection, how are we going to have the extraordinary marriage we desire by strengthening these different areas, which we call our 6 pillars of intimacy, so that way we can have closeness and connection, so we can have the extraordinary marriage we desire.
My brother, welcome to the Superhuman Life.
Awesome, man. I'm so excited to be here with you, Frank.
Me too, man. So tell me about what a sex challenge is and how a 60-day one has radically transformed your marriage and the trajectory of your life forever.
Yeah, sex challenge. Well, it is what it is, right? 60 days, 7 day, 30 day, 14 day. It's however many days that you and your spouse determine you want to have sex in a row. And Elisa and I first learned about a sex challenge or sex challenges. It's going on 14 years now. We were actually sitting in our room. This is rare for us too. Like we've never had a TV in our room. But this one evening, some friends of ours, their daughters were doing like beach tennis, and we're like, cool. Like we want to support our friends. And the next segment is on a news station here in town. The next segment, they had 2 couples talking about sex challenges. And it was the first time we ever heard about it. Elise and I were not in a good spot in our marriage. We'd been married 11 years at that point in time. We had a 5 and a 2-year-old. And the first couple that came up, she had gifted her husband 365 days of sex for his 40th birthday. I was like, dang. They don't say how many days they had sex, but I was like, whoa, this is pretty solid. Okay. Next couple comes on and they're like, hey, we had 101 days of sex in a row. And they went like through some craziness to make sure that they had sex 101 days in a row. We're about to lead a small group study at our church at the time. And I had challenged Elisa and those that were going to be in our group that we would talk about sexual intimacy, that we would talk about sex. We had actually found a book called Intimacy Ignited, talking on the Song of Solomon. And so I look at my wife, Elisa, and I go, holy cow, we're about to lead this 8-week study. We're not having sex like I would have thought, 11 years into our marriage. And I look at her and I go, hey, what if we, and I mean, I'm thinking quick here, Frank. I'm like, okay. What are we doing? I'm like, visionary, what can I do? What can we maybe make a shift? And I go, what if we do a 60-day sex challenge? And she looks at me, probably blinks quickly. And then before I could even really finish, she's just like, no. Gets up. And I'm like, all right. Gets up, goes to the bathroom, gets ready for bed because it was that time of the day. And I'm thinking to myself, I'm like, well, all right, at least I asked, maybe we'll have sex tonight. She comes out and she has this green face mask on. I'm like, what the heck is going on? So I was like, okay. And the next day, she remembers having this moment where she was doing laundry and she heard the voice of God saying, he's not asking for much. And it was in that moment that she realized that it wasn't like we were going to do something crazy in terms of, it was just, I was looking at us making our lives and our marriage a priority. And so I walked in from work that day and she's like, let's do it. And I was like, let's do what? Because I had already just had been rejected many a times in my marriage in 11 years. I was already on to something new and different. I'm like, do what? She's like, let's do a sex challenge. And that's where I was like, oh crap, what did I just get myself into? Because now it's all about, am I going to be able to get it up? Am I going to be able to perform? Am I going to be able to do this? And so it was an interesting, like real quick, like, oh no. And then we talked and determined, all right, let's do this 60-day sex challenge. With our small group being sort of like our accountability, they didn't do it, but they were there just sort of keeping tabs. How are you guys doing along the way? And we ended up completing 40 out of 60 days.
That's amazing, man. And I think, thank you. Great I knew the story and I just wanted to jump, like I said, right in there because I think it's going to get a lot of people's attention. I think we're going to obviously circle back there, but one thing that was kind of coming up a lot was like this theme or the recurring talk around expectations. You know, you had mentioned something like at that point within your relationship and marriage, like you weren't having the sex that you thought when you got into the marriage. And then when she had that aha moment, it was like, oh, he wasn't really asking for much. So it's like she had this kind of paradigm shift in maybe the way that she saw the expectations. And then when it came back around to you, it was like, oh, now I got to like level up and like step up to the expectations that he's having on me. Can you speak to, you know, how people, you know, fail in maybe getting into the relationship and the marriage with the expectations that they are walking into?
Well, I think a lot of what our expectations are driven by what we see in media. And so those expectations are shown through movies, now through social media, through just your normal TV shows. We see these things. And I think in our mind, we're unable to disassociate that that's a 30-minute TV show. That's an hour and a half movie. We're unable to disassociate it. So those are the expectations. We read it in books even. You know what I mean? And yet we're not talking to our spouse about what our expectations are. And so what ends up happening is what we believe it should be and what it is in actuality, there's such a discrepancy that we have a hard time connecting with our spouse. And we talk a lot about expectations. And so it's being able to share and going, okay, wow, I stepped in thinking we were going to have sex twice a week. And in actuality, we're having sex once a month. That's a big discrepancy, but how do we get to that point where we can now get to 2 times a week? And that's a lot of your emotional intimacy and being able to share with one another on both sides to go, oh, wow, yeah, I expected that, but I also expected our sex life to be a little more adventurous than just 2 positions that we do the one time a month, you know?
Yeah, no, that's great. And I definitely, you mentioned a couple of the pillars, you know, already to this point. I definitely want to make sure we're going to spend, you know, some time really unpacking those. You know, I think a lot of people get sex and intimacy kind of like intertwined and confused. Can you maybe speak to that a little bit and kind of how they're different and why it's important to not instantly go to sex when you're talking about intimacy?
Yeah. So Elise and I have been podcasting the One Extraordinary Marriage show since 2010, January 2010. And so we have had a firsthand glimpse into our own marriage since then, as well as into thousands of marriages. And we study ourselves. We're looking at what we're doing and how we're growing in different areas. We're listening to others. And one of the things that has been prominent over the years, and it just kept coming up, and it's just a recurring thing, is everybody just says, I want more intimacy. I talk to guys, we would talk to women, we would talk to couples, we would be at conferences, we would, you know, get emails, whatever it is. And it's just this recurring, well, we want more intimacy. And we would go back and go, what does that mean to you? It's a question that we use often with our couples. And what we share is when there's a word or there's a phrase and you're not sure about it, well, what does that mean to you? Because my expectation may be, well, this is what it means. But your spouse, on the other hand, it has a whole nother meaning to it. And so intimacy in our society now has basically become sex. Well, I want more intimacy. It just means I want more sex. Well, let me share this real briefly and real quickly. You can't have sex 24/7. Physically impossible. God has created us to have sex and have sexual intercourse, but not to have it 24/7. And so as we begin to look at this word intimacy, I looked it up and Elisa looked it up, the definition, and intimacy is closeness and connection. That is what the definition is. Closeness and connection. And so we begin to go, wait a minute. If intimacy is closeness and connection, how are we going to have the extraordinary marriage we desire by strengthening these different areas, which we call our 6 pillars of intimacy, so that way we can have closeness and connection, so we can have the extraordinary marriage we desire. And so that begins to turn that word upside down a little bit, and it causes people to go, oh, I got it. Sexual intimacy is one of those pillars, but it's not the only pillar. And so if I just, and I will say this, if I just negate my financial intimacy and there are massive cracks in it and there's debt and there's which we have had in our own marriage and currently have some. If there are past due bills that are coming into the household that are stressing out Elisa, well, that also impacts our sexual intimacy. It impacts our emotional intimacy, which is the verbal and nonverbal communication. And so you look at all of this and you go, okay, I want closeness and connection in each one of these areas. And by doing so, I have the extraordinary marriage. And Elisa has the extraordinary marriage that we both desire.
Yeah. Understanding it through that lens, like that definition of closeness and connection, and then using that example of like, if there's a bill that is like weighing over your head and it's like, maybe Tony knows about it and Elisa doesn't. And it's like, okay, Tony's got this. And it's like, I'm not going to share this with her because the way that she's going to respond and react, and like, I need to get the plan ahead of time. I need to know exactly how we're going to be able to pay it off. It's like, how can you be, authentically close and connected to her? Because like, so a lot of my work is centered around like changing the way that we view ourselves and the way that we operate from a subconscious level. Like, I think that's a big part of an identity change that the men that I work with have to go through, right? Exactly. Because so the subconscious mind is operating at 11 million data points per second. Like, it is rapidly taking in, processing, and putting out information. The conscious mind is only operating at 40. So it's like, what does that ultimately mean? It's like your subconscious is in a lot more control of your life and your reality than you ultimately understand. So if you have this thing that you're holding on to and you're not sharing it, you're not being truthful. You're not, I don't want to point at you're lying, but you're not being 100% truthful and honest with her. So that is going to literally put a barrier in between your ability to have closeness and connection with her.
And then that spills over into those other areas and our other pillars that cause that friction. And we're wondering why, for a lot of folks, why is our sex life suck? We thought it would be so much more, and yet it's not. Well, where are the cracks? What we call, what are the cracks in those pillars that are where the disconnect is happening?
Yeah, well, let's unpack them here a little bit, because obviously we know sexual. We've given an example here of financial. Go ahead and list out the next four, and let's kind of pick them apart a little bit, and then we'll talk how they kind of all work together.
Yeah. I'm going to share the book cover because I just love sharing that book cover.
Awesome. Guys. So all you guys watching me on the video, right here, absolutely, man.
So we go emotional intimacy, and this is your closeness and connection through your verbal and nonverbal communication. I want to share this again. Verbal and nonverbal communication. We can speak louder sometimes without ever even speaking. The way we... Man, if I'm on this interview with you, and all of a sudden you said something, Frank, and I just sort of went, what would you say? Like, you'd be like, what the heck is Tony doing? So does that create closeness and connection? And so we have to be aware of how we are coming and how we are presenting ourselves. I'm not saying I'm perfect. Believe me, I've been married 26 years to my beautiful wife, Elisa. 26 years. The first 11 sucked. I will tell you, they have been rough. The last 15 have been a work in progress. Are we perfect? No. Do we still have our moments? Absolutely. Have there been times, even in the last month, where Elisa has said something that I was like, what? Like, tone and timing, like, what are you talking about? Like, have I done that? Absolutely.
Yeah. And now Tony, that is that 11 million data points that is operating your life more than like, that's not, I didn't mean to do that. Just understand, like, there's parts of me that I'm not in control of.
It's just right.
Not that it's going to be an accepted excuse, but it's at least worth a shot out there.
Yeah. So that's your emotional intimacy. Then we go into our physical intimacy. And hear me out. Physical intimacy is your closeness and connection with your non-sexual touch. This is your hugs, your kisses, your hand holding, your cuddling, just, the hand on the knee, rubbing your spouse, giving her a massage, or she's giving you a massage. Can it lead to sexual intimacy? Absolutely. Does it have to? No. Primo example for us, for Elisa and I, when it comes to our physical intimacy, Elisa is not a touchy-feely person. She just isn't. I grew up Italian, man. I was one of those kids where you roll up into a ballroom with 300 people. My dad would look at me. He immigrated from Italy. I'm first generation Italian here. And he would look at me as like a 7, 8-year-old, and he'd be like, make sure you give everybody a kiss. And I'm like, okay, Dad. But there was that physical connection that I had with my dad. Even prior to him passing, I would always, if I saw my dad and I walked into his house or he walked into mine, I would give him a kiss on the cheek and I'd say, hey, I love you, man. with my mom, with my nana, my grandma, my aunts, uncles, cousins. But Elisa didn't grow up like that. And so our physical intimacy for many years was sort of like, well, what are we doing? I'd be like, hey, I want to kiss you. And she's like, I'm not like, what are we doing? And so for us, what we have learned over the years, our physical intimacy is not visible. If you were to see us on stage, we're not that couple who's going to be all holding hands and hugging on one another. We're doing our thing. We're going after it because we're believing for breakthrough in marriages. We're not just like hanging on each other. For us, our physical intimacy is when we go to bed. We typically go to bed naked. And it's a lot of that cuddling in bed, that physical touch we get throughout the night that really just builds us up and strengthens that pillar. Financial intimacy, closeness and connection around your financial assets and everything that happens, from cash flow plan, budget, to trust, wills, and everything in between. You know what I mean? It's all that going on at different times and in different places, depending on where you are in your marriage. Then we go into our spiritual intimacy. That is your closeness and connection around your beliefs and your spiritual practices. And this can be different for so many couples. This can be from attending services together to serving together in a different way, to just listening to worship, or even just praying together. And that, there are different times, different places where you're at. Recreational intimacy, that's our closeness and connection, and really around dates and activities. This is the fun pillar. This is how are we engaging one another that we have fun. And typically those are around dates. We are very much against just date nights only. We're about dates. How are you dating one another in your own way? And what are the activities you get to do together? And then your sexual intimacy, right? That's closeness and connection around romance, initiating, foreplay, and then sexual intimacy. Or not sexual, it's sexual intercourse. So we expand sexual intimacy. So it's not just sex, orgasm, boom, done. It's about romancing. It's about initiating. It's about that foreplay. And then it's about that sexual intercourse.
I love that you guys have the recreational, the fun part in there, because I think that's a part of life that people forget about, even within themselves. Like it is fundamentally necessary for us to be, I believe, truly healthy, happy, and living in a state of ultimate joy. Like we have to have an element of fun tied into our life. And fun can be all different types of things, but things that disconnect you from the work, things that disconnect you from the bills, things that disconnect you from even the sex talk and the other aspects of the relationship. Just what do you get out and do, and what do you find ultimate joy in? So I love that. And another thing that you were doing there, Tony, is you were using examples of relationships that were I don't want to say the intimate, like you gave some examples with your father, right? Like how these pillars tied into, or at least you were able to deeper understand the pillars in those, and then in those types of relationships. And you gave an example here, like with the how you're responding in our body language here, just on this call. So talk about how maybe you and Elisa going through developing these pillars has changed your view and perspective of maybe the male relationships that you have, or just understanding all of your relationships differently, and how these pillars can play a role in those.
Yeah, and they play a role in all of our relationships. I mean, I think about it with my kiddos. I have a 19 and a 16-year-old now. One is off at college, and another one is a junior. And I think about, okay, if I look at my emotional intimacy, my oldest is a boy, my youngest is a girl. My emotional intimacy, how am I engaging with them? How am I talking to them? What's that communication look like? Is it different than possibly that I'm engaging Elisa? Yeah. Guess what? They're younger. They're a different generation. Texting is cool. Like, I get them on the phone. It's 2 minutes, 3 minutes. Hey, what's going on, Dad? I'm doing good. How you doing, man? Cool. Like you working out? But I'm engaging in that with him. With my boy, when he was still living here, and when he comes home, we're huge football fans. Love that he got to play from 5th grade all the way to his senior year. Was just a solid player. And you know what? Some of the most amazing times I had with him was we would watch Saturday football, college football. Get on the couch. We just sit there, and literally, I would just have my hand just like on his leg, and his leg was like the size of my waist. Like his legs. He was a D lineman. He was a nose tackle. At his height, he was 255 pounds, 6'2". I'm 5'10", 170. He's just this big hunk of a dude, and we would just sit there and just, hey man, what's up? And even I respect what my dad instilled in me in that connection. And so even he and I will have those points where I'll be like, hey man, love you. And I'll give him a kiss as he's rolling out now to, go back up to college or things of that nature. Financial intimacy. He and I are talking since he was younger. Like, what are you doing, man? What do you got into those accounts? How are you doing? Like, where are you investing? Even right now, man, I've been very big into giving him the education that it took me many years to learn because it wasn't instilled in me or given to me and I didn't know where to go. But we talk about that probably on a weekly basis, man. Are you making sure he's working? I'm like, are you making sure you're putting funds into your asset account? Are you making sure that you're funding these things? So that way, as you get out of college, you're not going to be in debt. Like I've said that over him many times. I'm like, you are not going to come out of college with debt. You're going to figure out a way to do it. You're going to come out ahead. And what you've invested is going to be the seed money for your business, or if you want to buy a property or whatever you're going to do. And so, we have those conversations around our spiritual intimacy. Alex, at this point in time, he knows that we have a Heavenly Father. Does he practice it and go to church and attend service at this point in time? No, but I still talk into him. And we have a huge men's event here in San Diego with our church called Emerge. This last year, I was there with a very good buddy of mine, and he had called me on the Saturday of the event. I was like, hey, bro, you want to come next year? He's like, yeah, Dad, I want to go. I'm like, praise God. I'm like, all right, let's go. So that's that recreational intimacy with him. Those activities. We did an NCAA tournament. We'll go do fun stuff together. Typically, it's around sports with him. And then obviously the sexual intimacy, as we move into that on other relationships, it's the one everybody goes, well, what? Look at sexual intimacy isn't going to be sexual intercourse. You're not going to be romancing, initiating foreplay and have sexual intercourse with these other relationships. Do not do that. Like, that's not what it's meant for. And yet we can speak into those areas. And so with Alex, how do we speak about it? How do we talk about that? He's a 19-year-old boy. Like, what are we doing? How are we viewing pornography? Because that's unacceptable in my house. I believe that it is detrimental. And so we've had those conversations. How are you treating girls that you are meeting? What's that look like? If there's other, relationships, we can use that as that jumping off point to speak to our children and to others. And what does it look like? And Elisa and I lead a connect group here at our church. It's like a small group. And we have young adults, so they're 19 to 29-year-olds. And we took them through the last semester through the 6 pillars of intimacy. And we're sharing, how are you doing life with the 6 pillars of intimacy where you're at right now? And it was like really impactful.
Love that. And we're definitely going to circle back, Tony, to the pornography piece. I know that's a big part of your and Elisa's story. I know you've openly discussed that a lot of times. So I want to make sure we really get to that here today, obviously specifically for my men. But, I love all that you shared there. I mean, for me, I'm a very physical person, like physical touch. If we were discussing 5 love languages here, like physical touch right at the top for me, with anything. It's the way that I express, my friendship with other men. It's the hugging, like something I really picked up from Josh, years ago, was just that physical. And it's okay to have that with men. But, even with a lot of the young men and boys that I coach and mentor, like if I'm working with a little league team and it's like I'm having an important conversation with a young boy, I'm going to make sure I put my hand on his shoulder so he feels me while I'm talking with him. Cause I've always felt that there's a connection, and obviously we've been discussing here, there's a connection passed just through that touch. And in those moments when you're really, coaching or working with a young boy, you want to make sure that he feels that physical touch, and it's going to better help him, at least I think, accept what is being shared and taught to him.
Absolutely. With my young adult guys, same thing, man. Like, they'll come up to me with all sorts of things happening. And when they're here, it's very common for me to just give them a hug, let them know that they're seen, that they're valued, that I truly love them as part of our group and as a brother. And just in same thing, just to, hey man, like, hand on the shoulder or something. And, always,
you could feel them shift sometimes too. Like if a boy is holding on to something or a young man is holding on to something and he's trying to bring it to you, sometimes that touch, and it's like, okay, like, share it. You just feel like the release, like the stress kind of gone out of his body. And like, now he can open up and begin to talk. And the
attention too. It's like, hey man, I'm
here.
I've had to do that with Alex over the years as he was growing up and doing his things through high school. It's just like, hey man, Like, look at me, bro. Like,
Mm-hmm.
I see you, man. I got things are going on. And we went through COVID with him and some pretty stressful times, like blew out his ACL last game of his junior year, didn't know if he was going to play his senior year, went through COVID. We missed out on the actual start of a season. His linebacker coach, he's D-line, but we know his linebacker coach got murdered. And so being there for him and just, Alex, I'm here. Like, I'm here, dude. And just letting him know, like, that touch would be very helpful. And sometimes he would, move away, and it was okay. Like, it's okay, man. Like, he's going through some feelings and some issues. And yeah, man, I get it. It does change the atmosphere.
Yeah, no, absolutely. It's interesting. We've been talking about Elisa, your wife here. She's come up multiple times. You brought her into different stories that you share. One thing I really love is the way that you are very intentional about the way that you describe Elisa, or the way that you will at least bring her name into a conversation. Can you share with us what you specifically do and kind of your, I don't know, logic or reasoning, but why you describe Elisa in the way that you do?
Yeah. So I always introduce Elisa as my beautiful wife, Elisa. If I know somebody and she's going to meet them for the first time, I'll be like, hey, Frank, this is my beautiful wife, Elisa. And I've said this for many, many of years. And there was a moment in time where I really felt God just speak into me. And I had an addiction to pornography, and we'll get back to that here in a little bit, but I had an addiction to pornography, and what you see and what you're viewing skews the beauty that is in front of you and what has God given you, truly. And so I knew of the renewing of my mind had to happen. And God said to me, he's like, she's the most beautiful thing in your world. And I'm like, okay. And so from that point on, we even had goosebumps. Yeah, I know. I even get them still. From that point on, I was like, okay, God. And we have our script at the front of every episode that we share, and it's there, and it says, from San Diego, California, this is One Extraordinary Marriage Show, with Tony. I'm Tony DiLorenzo and it says in our script, I'm Tony DiLorenzo with Elisa. It doesn't say beautiful, but from the first time I saw that, it was always, I'm Tony DiLorenzo with my beautiful wife, Elisa. And it was always there. And I come to realize, and this is probably the subconscious, conscious mind working too, I have realized that by saying that, it impacts her and it impacts me. Because Elisa was at a point in her life too where she didn't have self-confidence. She didn't see herself as beautiful. She didn't see herself as one of the pretty girls. She never was that popular girl at school. You know what I mean? She always had her own stuff that she was dealing with. And by me telling her and repeatedly saying this to her, even when she didn't want to hear it, I kept saying, no, you are beautiful. And so that began to change her, and she does see herself as beautiful now, but it also began to change me, because as I began to say that word, I began to hear it too. And I'm like, oh, she is beautiful. She is my beautiful wife, Elisa. There is nobody who's going to be better than her. Guys, do I get it that there are other women that may walk by me that I look and I'm like, wow, yeah, God did good. Yeah, I'm human. And yet I don't stare there. I go, yeah, she's good looking. I'll even tell Elisa, will even be like, man, that was a good looking lady or something. You know what I mean? I'm like, yeah, but you are my beautiful wife, Elisa, and nobody will ever take that mantle in my life. So that's the way it came about. And even to this day, I mean, she still just beams at time when I'll just pull her aside and be like, oh yeah, so-and-so, this is my beautiful wife, Elisa. And they're like, oh yeah, so good. Great to meet you, so yeah.
That's beautiful, man. And for me, so you can understand like why that is as emotional as it is for me, and the goosebumps come up because I got to witness you explain a journey that I walk men through. And there's such a deep place like in my heart for that, because I understand what the men's consumption of pornography does to the woman's confidence, does to the woman's psyche. I understand that when we're caught up in a pornography addiction, our eyes are looking at like we literally are caught by it. It's like we know she's turning the corner before we can even see her, because once again, that subconscious mind, it's like she's going to be there. But how do we change that? How do we reprogram our subconscious mind? By our conscious thoughts that we drive into it in a very intentional way. I mean, literally what you just described there is a part of our curriculum in our coaching program that is specific to the men that are married. Like the guys that are in a relationship, we will walk them through like, Frank, how do I keep my eyes like from wandering when I'm walking down the street? Well, you have to tell your mind what is beautiful. And you do that by telling your wife every single day how beautiful she is to you. And then what you said there is you create this cycle, this cycle effect, right? Where you tell her, then it's that confirmation within yourself. And as long as you stay in integrity with what you are consciously putting your eyes on, the loop feeds itself time and time again. She grows more confidence. Her confidence then displays a higher level of confidence to you. She just naturally appears more beautiful. So you're going to tell her more and more often. And then it's just ongoing thing. And here we are, in how this is done for you guys. So
I will say this though, Frank, there are going to come times you may be saying it 1,000 times and she may go through a period in time in her life where she's just like, I don't feel it anymore. You know what? We're human. We go through these things, and how do we walk together? And it may be a place where she needs help. She may need to go get some coaching. She may need to look at therapy. There may be things in her past that are starting to bubble back up. She may be, even yourself, even us as guys, like these things hit us. And so is it perfect every single moment? Again, no. And yet, where are we putting our thoughts to? I really think changes how each of us are going to respond. But it's just, hey, if she's not there yet, it's okay. Keep saying it. I remember when Elisa didn't want to hear it at all. And I just kept saying it. And it brings up an interesting story, man, like with my dad. Real quick, just the power of words and the power we do have. My dad, like I said, immigrated here to the States he was 13 years old, came with his mom and his 3 brothers, and never finished the 8th grade, and just went to work. Never got told by his dad that he was loved. So when I was born, I never, in my years of growing up, ever heard my dad say, I love you. And so, let me think here now, 13 years ago now, I heard God speak to me. And it's just these interesting times in life where God would speak to me and I'm like, yeah, all right, cool. And I was just on my own journey, right? At that point in time, it was actually probably 12 years ago, actually, because the My Extraordinary Marriage show has been around since 2010, January 2010. So it was sort of right around there. So yeah, 12 years ago. And I just remember God just going, and my dad and I had a good relationship at that time. We rebuilt and had been able to talk to each other. But God said, every time you get off the phone with your dad, you tell him you love him. I'm like, nope. I'm like, I've never heard my dad say it to me. I don't think I need to, like, why? And he's like, yep. And so I remember having these conversations and with my dad. And I remember the first time going through that process and my heart beating and I'm going, oh crap. And I know the conversation's coming to an end and so it comes to an end and we're about to get off. And I just say right at the end, I was like, hey dad, I love you. He's like, all right, Tone, and hangs up the phone. I'm like, all right, well, that went really well there, God. Thank you. I just feel like junk even more now, Dad, or God. And yet it was just one of those things where it's just like, hey, just keep telling him, keep telling him, keep telling him. And so every conversation, just keep, hey, love you, Dad. Hey, love you, Dad. Hey, love you, Dad. Wouldn't say anything back. Just, all right, Tone, have a good day. All right, Tone, have a good day. All right, Tone, have a good day. And then I remember sometime later, after finally saying it one day, I was getting off the phone with him and I was like, all right, love you, Dad. And as fast as I could catch it, he was like, love you, Tone, and hung up the phone. And I was like, holy crap. I was like, wow. I get teary-eyed because my dad passed 5 years ago. And I think about, what if I never took the step? What if I wouldn't have gotten uncomfortable? Where would I be today? And I remember when my dad was battling cancer, came back again with the force. It was in his brain and in his spine. And taken over his body. I remember sitting in his back room and he's like, Tony, am I going to go to heaven? And I said, you know what, Dad? You are. And we sat there and we prayed prayer of salvation. And I'm like, Dad, just because you didn't go to church every week doesn't matter. God loves you. And I remember just sitting there going, wow, I got to experience something pretty amazing. And then a couple of weeks later, he was pretty bad off. We had hospice come in, and he passed quickly, but I got to be there when he took his dying breath, his last breaths, I mean. And I got to say, I love you, Dad. And he looked, and he heard it. And at that point in time, I was like, Mom, get over here. He's going to take those final breaths. And she got to tell him he loved her, or she got to tell him she loved him. But I think about that. I go, what's holding us back? Is it our pride? Is it our ego? Is it because we got hurt? And sometimes we got to get past those things that have happened in our lives, and we got to deal with that stuff. And if you're dealing with something, maybe you do need a coach on your side. Maybe you need to get with Frank. Maybe you need some deeper therapy done because you were traumatized. I don't know what's happened in your life or what's gone on. And yet you don't need to live here anymore because there is freedom. And I'll tell you, you don't get those second chances. You don't. So, hey, your dad may not be around. Your mom may not be around. You may not talk to him anymore. You may have just said, I'm done with them. But maybe you just need to forgive them. You need to release that. There are things that can happen in your life when you just start to go, okay, I'm willing to take those steps because it's short, just like that. And, life happens. So I just wanted to share that because that was another one of those just stepping out and just using our words, that emotional intimacy to not only impact him, but impact myself. And I just saw my dad just grow. I remember times, Frank, where my kids were younger at the time and I'd be running around. I'm running my business. I'm like, let's go. We got to do this. And I'd be talking to him and I'd be like, all right, Dad, got to go. And he would be the one to go, I love you, Tone. I'm like, yes, I love you, Dad. I love you, Dad. And so I'll always be blessed. And it'll probably be to my last dying breath to go, I got that opportunity and I'll go see him again. We'll party.
Tony, man, I know you've been doing, you and Elisa have been running the One Extraordinary Marriage for, I think, 10 plus years where, we're over 3 years, 100, almost coming up on 150 episodes here. We've had some incredibly emotional moments and stories. Obviously, we talk on some very, dark things. We've explored a lot of, dark moments in people's lives, recovery moments. We've had, we've discussed similar stories to that, man. I don't know if we've had a story that I feel is going to reach and impact people in the way that did. So I appreciate you going there, man. And it's bringing something up for me, man. I don't want to just completely hijack today's conversation, but I think I want to share it because I shared this on a group call last night with some of my men, and similar, dynamic relationship, I think, with my father not being, too expressive in his love. And I think for me, I held on to a lot of anger towards him through my early 20s. And even into my early 30s, like a lot of what I was going out and trying to accomplish in the world was like kind of to prove that I could do things without him. Like, you didn't provide these things to me. You didn't show me these things. So I'm going to go figure it out on my own, and you're not going to know about it. And I'm just going to show the world that I'm better than everybody. And that was kind of the driving force for me. And it created this tension, right? We couldn't have closeness and connection with my father because there was an anger inside of me. So even when I did see him, even at holidays, even at birthday parties, anytime we were together, it's like there was this shield, this force between us that we couldn't be real close and intimate. And, since I've been on this journey here with, coming to my faith in 2018, with Josh, and like one day I'd love to really share, I think I shared that story with you. And then obviously in 2019, starting down this path that I've been on now, like, I felt the removal of the guilt and shame with my pornography was the weight that needed to be lifted so that I could get intimate with everybody in my life. And that's the journey that I've been on, is like, I haven't had a relationship, for 2.5 years now, in terms of like a dating relationship. I have relationships with people all over the globe, right? Like, but so I've been able to kind of look at, and that's why I brought up that question earlier, where like these pillars outside of an intimate relationship, how do they work? But there was a moment in probably the summer of 2019. I had conquered the porn addiction. I was going down the path of launching the podcast. My life had been radically transformed. I was on a mission to change the world, which we're doing now.
Yeah.
And I was at my dad's house, and I was with my ex at the time. She was there with us, and it was one of those conversations where I was finally kind of sharing with my dad what was going on in my life, and I felt a closeness connection to us just through, I guess, the emotional pillar at that point, because it was very conversational. And as we were leaving, it was the first time I went to give my dad a hug. And like I'd shared, I'm a very physical person, and that's how I express it. But I put my arms around my dad, and at first he stood there like with his arms to his side. And Stephanie, who is my ex, and she was there with us at the time, literally picked up my dad's hands and took them and locked his hands around my arm, and I got to hug my dad. He didn't willingly do it at that point, but once again, when those fingers touched and he clenched his hands behind me, just like when I put my hand on the young boys and I felt the stress release out of them, I felt an ease with my father. And, we've really built our relationship back up over these last 3.5 years. It's interesting because we're going to a comedy show tonight after we end with this. I got a couple more hours of work I need to do, and we got tickets. Just the two of us are going to go spend the night together. We're going to have dinner, and it's cool. He lives, I moved up to the suburbs here. I'm like a mile from him, so he's been coming to the house regularly. When I'm gone, he's going to be helping out with Bentley. But just it was that one moment though. It was like that physical intimacy that needed to be formed and created through our touch. And it has changed us over the last, 3 years. So, but thank you for sharing that, man. And I think that story is going to drive a lot of people that, no matter where you're at in life, like if you're wrestling with something, if there's a step that needs to be taken, like you don't need to hold on to this. Like you don't need to live in whatever it is you're going through. Take that first step, reach out, have the conversation, call the mentor, talk to your pastor, talk to your wife if there's something that you're holding on to. So I want to go back a little bit here and maybe talk about your and Elisa's journey to creating the One Extraordinary Marriage, because we opened up at the beginning, like with the sex challenge. You had said you guys weren't really at a great point. We've unpacked the pillars here. We've talked about different parts of your work. And I think now it would maybe be good to maybe share with people like how that's changed your life, where you guys were at, how it changed, and then how that's led to the podcast, the work, the coaching, everything that you guys are doing today.
Love to. It's always fun to see the journey because it always looks cool. Like this is 12 and a half, 13 years in the making right now where we're at, you know what I mean? And we all want to be rock stars when we step onto the stage. And yet it takes some years to get onto that stage at different times and at different places of your life. So we completed our sex challenge, right? Our 60-day sex challenge. We did 40 out of 60. And it was really cool because those who were in our small group with us, who were cheering us on and were excited about it, they ended up telling the small group director. They're like, I don't know if you know. And I think one of the couples, maybe one of them was like on staff or part-time on staff at the church or something. And I think they just told our small group director, I don't know if you know, but this is what Tony and Lisa did. And the small group was just absolutely amazing. From laughter to tears and everything. And so the small group director reached out and said, hey, I heard about this and really interesting. I want to just share with our marriage and family pastors. And we're like, sure. And so the next year they asked us to speak at our marriage getaway for the church. And Lisa and I were just like, well, what do you want us to talk about? And they're like, just talk about your 60-day sex challenge. We're like, okay, cool. It was really interesting because I was the hero to all the guys, and Elisa was like the villain to all the wives. And it was just sort of weird, but it was just like one of those things where you're like, no, we both really enjoyed this. This wasn't a one win, one loss type of a deal. So we shared through that. We had some really cool Q&A. And then after that, people were like, well, what's next? And we're like looking around going, what do you mean what's next? At that point in time, I think we had a 6 and a 3-year-old. I was running another business at the time. I'm like, what do you mean what's next? Like, we're good. Like we enjoy our lives now. We enjoy our marriage. We're good. Like, and so people just kept asking like, what's next? What's next? And it took, I think, another year, 6 months to a year before we actually just started jumping in and going, well, maybe we do need to speak into this marriage world because what's out there right now isn't really helpful for us. It wasn't very helpful for us. There were some really amazing folks in the marriage world, but they were typically like in their 60s. not like it is today. And so we were like, gosh, it's so like, you have an unhappy marriage. Okay, guys, just take your wife on a date. And it wasn't, nothing talked about your sexual intimacy whatsoever. If it was just sort of like, just go have sex and let's not talk about it any much more than that. And so back in the day when blogging was big, that's where we started. Well, we started blogging, but that caused actually more tension than was necessary in our marriage. And so Elisa and I basically said, we got to figure something else out because this isn't working, and it's not going to be long lasting. And also from a reader standpoint, there's so many nuances to marriage. When you write it on black and white, people can really misconstrue what you're trying to say. And it was at that point in time, we had a coach. He was like, hey, there's this thing called podcasting. I'm like, cool. What's that? Again, remember everybody, this is, it actually would have been 2009. This probably would have been like September, October 2009. And I'm like, okay, what's that? And he's like, well, it's like having your own radio show. And I'm like, cool. So you're talking like we just got to talk? He goes, yeah. And I'm like, cool. I can talk. Like I can talk. We can do that. And so I got connected with somebody else to help put it all together. This is back in the day when there was only iTunes. There were no podcast apps. There was nothing around like you have today. It was like Wild West. And the podcasting world is still sometimes I feel like in the Wild West, but take us back 13 years and you're definitely in the Wild West. And so I ordered all the equipment, had it all ready to go. And this is right during the Great Recession, and we lost everything. So me spending about $800 on a bunch of equipment when we were under and short selling our house wasn't like the smartest thing to be doing. But I was like, okay, we're going to do this. And so it sat like by our garage door for like 3 months until Elisa finally tripped over and she's like, what are we doing with this stuff? I said, well, I guess we're going to podcast. And that's when we got it all set up, set ourselves up in our garage. And we recorded episode 1, 60 Days of Sex. And for the last 12 and a half years, we podcast every single week. We have not stopped through seasons when we were dry, through seasons when we have had abundance, through seasons of loss and hurt. We just kept on just going, we're going to keep sharing. We're going to keep sharing. We're going to just keep talking into people's lives. And our mission has always been one couple. So as long as we're talking to one couple, then we've done what we've been called to do. Through that, though, we have written 6 books. Obviously, our newest one, The 6 Pillars of Intimacy. Those came out of all of the journeys and what we've heard back from the one family. That's what we call our audience, those who are part of One Extraordinary Marriage. And we've built out courses. We've done live events. We do now, and Elisa has been doing coaching now for 10 years, and that's evolved over the years to the point now where she is just constantly just diving into couples' lives and just seeing the transformation. And she's an amazing coach. I would consider her probably top 1% of marriage coaches in the country. Does 6 figures and just continues to just talk into people's lives, keep going after it. We have another book on the docket for next year, which will be the 6 Pillars of Intimacy, Empty Nesters edition. Because so many folks that's a really transitional time. And so we have, we love our books. We love getting into people's hands. And so it's just been one step after another. We have different things that we do workshops, we do live events. When COVID hit, we did everything online and did, you name it, we've done it. We've just constantly are just like, how do we impact one couple? How do we impact one couple? And in 2019, the end of 2019, I sold my other business that I had been in for 22 years. I'd run that business for 17 years at the time. I sold that business off, and I've been in One Extraordinary Marriage myself full time since that period. And so we just keep amplify. What are we doing that is going to spread the message far and wide and impact more couples that even we can't touch?
Yeah. 2009. I mean, I think for me, podcasts came like even aware and relevant in 2014, maybe 2015 was like the first time I was listening. Like, yeah. So you're 5 years, like already up to that point.
Yeah. I wondered how people found us too, Frank, in those early years at times. And I'm like, what are we doing? Like, what are we doing? And it was okay when we got like hugs from people in Alaska or Tennessee or Texas or Montana.
Yeah.
It's just like, whoa, where are you finding us? Like, how are you finding us? And back then there were just these different podcast networks. But yeah, it was probably more like 2014, 15 where it really started coming about, where apps were starting to be developed and everything there. It really began to, oh, wow, there's this thing called podcasting and we can listen to it.
Yeah, but what an incredible lesson. I mean, so there's a segment of this audience and, obviously the guys that we work with as well. It's like, a lot of, like, we attract a lot of young entrepreneurs, young business minded people. They, maybe they're trying to transition out of corporate. They got a little side hustle going on. Like, I need to get it going quicker. How do I get this overnight success? How do I make, $100,000 in the first month? And it's like, here's an example. It's like, 5 years of just showing up daily or weekly, however, I think it was weekly. You guys said you were doing the episodes. It's like before it even became really relevant and there was apps created for it. So if you've been doing something for a month or for 3 months or for 6 months, it's like you just gotta stay consistent. I mean, it was 2 years of daily videos on YouTube for me until things really kind of like the bottom opened up and it was like the lead flow kind of changed and like the podcast has been 3 years and we saw this massive like spike right around the 2-year mark and now we're kind of seeing some month-to-month growth.
That's and you know what it is, though, Frank? It's consistency. And because we're in high touch businesses, people want to know that you're around. You're going to get some early adopters. Believe me, you're going to get people who are going to be like, wow, this is great. And those are the ones that just keep the sparks going, right? Like, oh, wow. Like when we put out our first book, I thought we were going to sell thousands and thousands of them. And, we sold like off the launch, I think we sold maybe like 100. And I'm going, wow. Maybe if even 100. And I'm like, okay, well, that doesn't look really good. Like, who's buying this? But we had those early adopters who kept that spark sort of going to the last book where, in the first year, we'll sell probably over 10,000 self-published. We're self-published authors, all of our books, and we're going to sell 10,000 in our first year. That's amazing because most self-publishing authors only sell 250 books, period. And we'll just keep pressing into that book. But I think it's the consistency, knowing that we're still here. We're not going anywhere. We're not gonna just up and leave because it's something that we truly believe in. And for me, it was a side hustle for many years. I had another full-time business that I was running, and I loved what we did there and what I got to do there. And at the same time, for me, it was our side hustle, and Elisa was in it somewhat full-time, but we also had young kids around, so she was also a full-time mom.
And the podcast has always been just the two of you.
Yeah, it has been. We've only done one interview at this point in time. That may change a little bit. We're talking about doing some different things, but up to this point, it's only been Elisa and I for 718 episodes at this point of this recording. Yeah. It's just been Elisa and I talking to one another, letting people into our lives each and every week.
Well, if you can, Tony, maybe speak to how you have felt that intentionality of having a recorded conversation that we're going to show up every single week. And we're just going to have it, whether or not we feel good, what we look like, if we're under the weather a little bit. I recorded so at the beginning of January, it was like how to make 2022 the best year ever. It was like 5 hacks. And I wanted to come up with some things that were like outside of your everyday, like wake up and journal or take an ice bath. It was like, and one of them was, because I feel for me, having this podcast has been a catalyst of self-growth and improvement in myself that I've never experienced before. I mean, I've been a massive reader. I've been reading, self-development, Tony Robbins. Like I've just been entrenched in books for almost 2 decades now. I've attended a lot of seminars and courses and just programs and working with mentors. Like I've invested a lot of money into my own growth. But I think for me, it's the intentionality of conversations centered around growth and topics that I'm interested in that has kind of like unlocked like a new level of growth, because I could read the book, Tony, right? Like it's right here. But I could also bring you on and ask you some questions around your processing that led you to the book, or what were the stories and what was some of the things underneath. So in the how to have the best year ever, it was like, I just said it, spend 30 minutes a week with one person having an intentional conversation. And I think for many people, it's like they're on their phones constantly, or even when they're sitting watching TV or that they're dating, it's like, put the phones away, sit down. Even if you got to record it on Zoom, like that's okay, but just have intentional conversations. So if you can just maybe speak to how, you guys running this podcast, having intentional conversations week over week over week has improved the relationship and intimacy through all these pillars that you guys talk about.
Yeah, it's the one thing that has been the consistent in our lives is that 30 minutes. Earlier episodes were anywhere from 45 to 60 minutes, but now for the last handful or more years, it's 30 minutes. it has been the biggest positive in our marriage. 30 minutes once a week, we get to talk. And we talk about all sorts of crazy things. And I think for us, it just allows us to hear where we're at. And we bring up these topics because we hear them from others in the one family. And then Elise and I are synthesizing it together. And it's really interesting to hear what she's saying at times because she'll put her marriage coaching cap on now. You know what I mean? And I'll just put sort of my storytelling hat on. But it's just really interesting to hear the stories and where we're at. And like, my goodness, it dives deeper. And I'll listen to Elise and I'm like, wow, I didn't realize that. Or tell me a little bit more about how you feel around this, Elisa. And so having that conversation each and every week, just being intentional about it, just allows us to go, wow, how are we going to be intentional in our own marriage and take action? And it really has just been that consistent once a week. And truth be known, I really believe that if couples just took 30 minutes, had a conversation, and if you don't know what to talk about, go listen to the podcast and just start listening to it and go, well, Tony and Lisa just talked about this topic. Let us talk about this topic. What does that look like in our marriage? How would that look like for us? What should we be doing? Here's the action steps we got at the end of the episode. Go take some action around it and go after it. And some of those conversations, I think, Frank, are those ones that they're touchy. And especially when we get into that sexual intimacy, going, well, I don't know how to talk about this, but you get to hear Elise and I talk about it. And it really does allow for folks to just go, wow, if Tony and Lisa talked about it like that, where am I at? And how can I express that to my spouse? And I have found it to be just so much fun. We have jokingly said, if the podcast ends, we either are going to have those 30-minute conversations, or we're going to have to get our own marriage coach once a week just to sit down and have those conversations. So to truthfully force us into that place of going, it is on our schedule. Because if it's not, then it's probably not going to happen. We just know ourselves well enough that podcasting, walk-in talks, dates, they end up being on our schedule and on our calendars because we make each other a priority and it's important to have them. So yeah, it's 12 and a half years, man. It's my legacy that I'll be leaving to my great-great-great-grandchildren, that they can go listen to us going, holy crap, look what they were talking about.
I mean, when you think about that, though, I mean, what an incredible timestamp that you have, right? It's like, here's grandpa and grandma, for 15, 20 years, like weekly conversations, kids, like go have fun, like explore the growth, explore, the ups and the downs, the setbacks and failures and all of that. It's definitely podcasting has made me a more intentional conversationalist in all my relationships. Like I feel just more engaged, more present when I'm with all people, more interested in what they do. So much to the point where I'm with some people sometimes I'm like, I'm sorry, it feels like I'm interviewing you. I'm just wildly fascinated with people. So obviously, the book is called The 6 Pillars of Intimacy. You can get it on Amazon. We're going to plug your guys' site. I think one of the last things I just wanted to ask you, so we have a segmented audience here. We have, we speak in recent men. About 90% of our listeners are from the male side. I'd say down that is split though. So half of them being married or in, relationships that they're having the conversation about exploring marriage. Obviously, they're going to go pick it up because it speaks to them. But why would a single guy or what could a single guy, or why do you feel it's important for a single guy to maybe understand this before getting into trying to find a wife or a spouse or a future mate?
It's setting those expectations. You said it early on in the episode, right? What are your expectations? What have you seen growing up? What have you seen? What are your expectations of marriage? What is that? You get a glimpse into a marriage that's been around for 26 years, through the highs and the lows, through the good times and the tough times. One where there isn't perfection. We don't try to ever show that. And yet we show that there is growth that happens. And what I have seen over the years, and we've gone emails and what we call our testimonials or hugs, we have gone hugs from as young as 16-year-olds who have found the One Extraordinary Marriage show and they're listening. And I'm like, why would a 16-year-old listen? Well, I come from a divorced family. I don't know what it's like to have a mom and a dad, and you guys are my mentors from afar. You are my mom and dad from afar. and I get to hear what I've never heard before, and I get to really understand and have that expectation. I'm not just saying from a 16-year-old, but you could be 25 years old, you could be 30 years old and haven't seen a marriage the way you thought it should be, and we're here to come alongside you and go, hey, we'll put our arms around you and guide you and mentor you, and knowing that when you step into a relationship, you're already on the fast track to go, hey, you know what? If we're going to go steady, like if we're going to call out, what do they call this? I don't know. There's so many different levels. They're like exclusively talking. If we're exclusive now, and I don't know what that level is, that exclusive.
Is it still Facebook official? Because that was a thing for a long time. It's like it became a thing. Is there a way that you put it on Instagram? Maybe there's a TikTok thing you link the accounts. I don't know what
it is anymore. But if we're exclusive, and you're going, well, wait a minute. I've been listening to the One Extraordinary Marriage show, and I believe in what's said in this book, The 6 Pillars of Intimacy, and that's the way I want to live out. Then you coming into this world, we need to do this together. And so you're already on the fast track. You're 10 plus years, 11, 12, 15 plus years ahead of where I was. And so you're already able to go, this is going to be our framework for our marriage. So we don't step into this going, it's all just going to be rainbows and unicorns. And then it doesn't. And then as we get the DMs and the emails, I've been married for 6 months. I've been married for a year and a half, and I think we're going to get a divorce. I've been married 7 days, and I think I married the wrong person. That's what you walk into when you begin to listen and start to change your own mindset and your own expectations of what marriage really is. Because marriage starts when you say, I do. Unfortunately, in our society, everybody thinks that's the end. It's like, we got married. Yay, we did the big party. Yay, we all got to have a great time. Yay, let me tell you something. That's the starting point where in your mind, you're like, we did it. Guess what? You got a long way to go. So get on the journey now and start listening. Because if not, you're going to just be like, great, I'm married. And you're going to sit back and think everything's going to work out just the way you want it to. And guess what? There are going to be times when you get rejected. There are going to be times when you come up against something where you expected something and she didn't want to do it. And you're frustrated. There are going to be times when you start looking over here and she catches you and it's like trust has been broken. Believe me, jump in now, get into it now because you're already on the same page. And that way you start walking in those early days, those early months, those early years, well ahead of most people. Believe me, well ahead of most people. So that's what I would say.
Dude, what a radical paradigm shift there was right there, right? Like how many men right now are out there looking at the dating as a game of finding, attracting, putting on a character to get to the end point, to throw this party, celebration, white dress, roses, kiss this, boom, we're married, I won. And then no, it's like you just like maybe you won that. Like you got the even bigger game. Like now you gotta like be ready and prepared for.
Oh yeah, and there's a lot that goes into it because it's combining finances. It's how do we touch? How do we have sexual intimacy? What does our recreational intimacy look like? I mean, all of that, man. Marriage is not for the faint of heart. It will take work. It will take time. It will take your undivided attention. But I can say unequivocally, when you do that together, when you guys are when you're standing together and on the same team, you can have that extraordinary marriage. And I'm a testament to it. 26 years in, and literally, I am at the place where I could not have ever imagined. But it's taken many a years of undoing all the junk we did early on and pouring into one another through the thick and thin and knowing that we have each other's back no matter where we're at.
And that's why for me with the men that I, specifically coach and lead, like the ones that are still single and are working through this, but they're like, oh, well, what should I be looking for a wife or a girlfriend right now? It's like, no, like because of this right here, because of what you're getting into in the expectations and responsibilities and the work and the communications and the challenges and paying attention to all these 6 pillars. It's like, that is all the reasons why. Make sure you're taken care of, that you've conquered whatever it is you're struggling with, that you've set the foundation, that you got your financial, order in house and you know where you are, you know what you're doing, and you know what you're building towards in terms of your life as a man. So,
Tony, you're getting healthy. You get healthy. And once you're into that place, and I'm not saying you're ever going to be 100%, but when you get into that place where you're like, man, I am, then it's like, start stepping in, because
Yeah.
it's just so much better for you. You're just in such a better spot. You're not going after and seeking out a spouse in a lack mentality, but you're actually seeking them out in an abundance mentality, which is a vastly different place to be. And the quality of the relationship in the marriage is going to be much, much different.
Wow, brother, that is ringing so true right now, man. Incredible, Tony. This has been such an incredible conversation, guys. We're gonna get the book, the Tony's podcast, The One Extraordinary Marriage. Everything will be plugged down in the show notes there below for you guys. Highly recommend checking out the podcast, checking out some of the conversations, guys. They're short. I need to do some of them like walking and talking, very casual kind of structure. Obviously, get the book if you're interested in exploring deeper these 6 pillars that we discussed here. So, yeah. Tony, we normally end with the same question. I'm gonna put a little spin on it today because of who you are and specifically what you guys do. So obviously the title of the show is called The Superhuman Life. We usually ask, I give this little, analysis of what I think it means to live a superhuman life. And I like to get the guest take on what they think it means to live a superhuman life. I'm going to put a little spin on it here today. So Tony DiLorenzo, author of 6 Pillars of Intimacy, host of The One Extraordinary Marriage with his beautiful wife, Elisa. How would you describe living or having a superhuman marriage?
Oh, geez. A superhuman marriage is actually one where we are intentional and we're taking action. That is the superhuman marriage, because when both of us are intentional about making our marriage a priority and then taking those 1% changes and taking action, that creates the ripple effect and the change that we need to have. So that's what I would say it is. And always holding her hand. I just, that superhuman marriage is, even when things are tough, it's just still holding her hand and we're on the same team together to achieve something extraordinary.
Just maintain that physical intimacy
connection
at all times.
Yes,
at all times, brother. Guys, Tony's been incredible. Guys out there, thank you so much for tuning in here today. If this is your first time listener, thank you so much for checking out the show. We're glad you landed on this one. What an incredible conversation, what an incredible story and journey that we explored here today with some real deep insight into the 6 pillars. So guys, go check out the book. But if you're getting value out of the show and you want to help us continue to grow, we mentioned it here. We've seen some tremendous growth and impact with the show. You can help and support us in one of 2 ways. First, also leave it a 5-star rating, whether it's on Apple, Spotify, whatever platform. But more importantly, if there's somebody in your life that needs to hear today's conversation, whether they're going through something in their relationship, whether they're going through something, they need to take that first step out and begin to have that uncomfortable conversations. Do us a favor, but do them the blessing by sharing today's conversation with them. But for Tony DiLorenzo, Frank Rich, host here, we love you guys, and we'll see you next week.